Number 1. I was about 6 or 7 when my family took a holiday to Disneyland, Florida. I was a fairly aloof child, and a stranger danger was something that had been drilled into us at school. My mom was paranoid about us going off with strangers, and was convinced that I was a target, being a blue-eyed blonde kid. All I wanted was my freedom to run. Nope, from day one, I had a Velcro strap put around my wrist and a blingy cable linking me to my mom, who wore the other end on her wrist. I was effectively on a lead. A week at Disney, on a lead, was hell for me. And probably for my parents too. Nowadays you'd call it ADD, but back then it was just called naughty. If I wasn't trying to undo the strap, I was barking like a dog, howling like a dog, or rolling around on the floor. I was a joy of a child. The last day there, I had calmed down. Well, I was speaking like a human again, rather than a dog. I begged and begged for my parents to let me off the lead, until finally they gave in and said yes, I could take the strap off. But I had to hold one of their hands. Fair deal. All went swimmingly to begin with. I stayed close to my parents, held their hands. As time went by, it became clear I wasn't going to run off. I was allowed moments of freedom. There were so many exciting things to see. All my favorite Disney characters waving, my favorite music playing. We began to cross an open area, which I think was generally towards the exit of the park. I was still hands-free. My attention was firmly fixed on Minnie Mouse, who was ahead of me. When my dad grabbed my hand, I stuck to the rules. The deal was I held my parents' hand, so off we went towards the exit to leave, when my dad started running. I began to run too. I wasn't sure where we were running to, but I was a hyperactive child, so in my head I was like, yay, running. Then I hear my mom scream, and I mean scream my name from behind me. I looked over my shoulder to see my mom, my brother, and to my surprise, my dad chasing after me. I felt the hand holding mine tighten, and I looked up at the man I thought was my dad. He was a mid-50s man with gray hair and a beard, not my 40-year-old dad with black hair and no beard. The creepy dude never looked at me once. His face was blank and he looked pretty calm. My little feet brakes came on out of shock, and I became a lead weight, which, along with the people who stopped around us due to my mom's screaming, was enough for my sprinting family to catch up with me. The would-be child abductor then clearly decided that he didn't fancy his chances against my dad, dropped my hand, and disappeared. My dad chased after him, and my mom and brother grabbed me. I can't remember much of what happened afterwards. Dad was built for comfort, not speed, so we didn't catch the dude. Mom was hysterical. I was gutted because this meant I was never going to be let off the lead again. My parents saw the police out there, and they said that there were a number of attempted abductions around the time at the Disney park.
Number 2. This incident took place in New York City on a Saturday night. I had dinner with a few friends, and afterwards I started to go back to the Upper East Side where I live. I had just gotten off the subway, and when I got up to the street, I noticed a young lady in her 20s leaning against the wall and crying. I also noticed that she was pregnant. Being the sensitive person I am, I kept looking at her and debating if I should say something. She noticed I kept looking at her and approached me. Let me just say it was around 12 degrees and this woman was wearing a t-shirt. I became concerned that she was in trouble. She introduced herself as Katie and told me that she was 7 months pregnant and homeless. She asked if I could get her some hot chocolate or some hot beverage from the D&D down the street. I didn't want to be insensitive because that's not the sort of person I am, so I offered to give her cash instead. To be honest, I was tired and I just wanted to go home, but I did want to help her. Now this is where it gets a little weird. I take out my wallet and she can clearly see that I have hundreds in cash as well as my credit cards. I'm not trying to sound like a spoiled brat or anything, but that's just the way it was. She declines the money offer and says that she would prefer the hot drink. I continue to hold out a $20 bill and said, "I'm sorry about your situation and I wish I could help more, but I really need to get home." She keeps insisting, telling me it's only a few blocks away. I again tell her I can't and hold out the money. She declines once again, but I can see now that she's starting to get aggravated. I apologize again and wish her well, and I start to leave, when my curiosity gets the best of me. I see her leaving and going the opposite direction of the D&D. I then made the worst decision, although I don't regret it. I followed her. Something was off about this girl, and I wanted to see what she was up to. I figured I could handle the situation if things got weird. The street we were walking down was crowded, and I managed to remain unseen as I followed her. After maybe 5 minutes, she turned a corner and went up the street. This street was seriously shady as fuck. It was dark and it was empty. I decided to stay back, but I kept looking around the corner, only to see her go into what seemed like an alley. I slowly walked to where the corner of the alley was and carefully peered around to see Katie with 3 men and 1 other woman. They were at the far end of the alley, so I managed to remain undetected. There was what looked like a van. I couldn't tell, but it looked like a U-Haul van. I overheard them arguing and saying something like, "Next time you wear the t-shirt in the freezing cold, and it didn't work on the other one last night either." Then I hear a man's voice. "You need to look convincing." Katie yelled back at him, "I'm wearing a fucking pregnant belly. How more convincing can that get?" I then carefully peeked around the corner to see Katie taking off a fake belly she was wearing. At that moment, my heart sank. I almost fell into a trap. I began to walk away and relaxed a little when I got to a crowded street. When I got home, I called my friend and told him what had happened. He had grown up in the city and told me that he heard of people who did stuff like that. But I don't think they wanted to rob me. If that was the case, why didn't Katie take my wallet when I took it out? I walk past that area almost every day, and I've never seen her since. I don't know what their plans were, but they certainly weren't good.
Number 3. Shortly after high school, some of my friends and I went camping one weekend. We drove into a national park, which had a campground, but we decided to camp outside the ground so we wouldn't have to be worried about making too much noise and disturbing other campers. We set everything up into a nice clearing next to a bushy slope. Get a fire going, the moon comes out, and we crack open some beers. So far, so good. Around 10 p.m., we suddenly hear the sound of people walking downhill through the brush towards our camp. This puts us on guard, but we weren't too concerned because it's a popular park, and we figured it was just other campers making the most of the long weekend. We all keep our eyes strained towards the sound, and soon enough, the people arrive at the bottom of the slope, but they don't cross the tree line into the clearing. They just step in a huddle, and it's hard to make out the details, but it looks like there's about 6 figures. Somewhat oddly, all of them are dressed in white, and the moonlight reflecting off the garments gives them an eerie glow. I can sense my friends are starting to feel nervous as well as I. My friend D tries to escape the tension and calls out to the group in a friendly way. "Hey, how's it going?" They don't reply. D keeps calling out to them stuff like, "We're just enjoying some beers here. It's a beautiful night. What you up to?" They don't reply. Eventually, one of the figures emerges into the tree line and walks towards us. He stops just beyond the light of our fire and stands there, staring us down. D bows at him for a few seconds with some nervous banter, but the man cuts D off mid-sentence. "How long will you be here for?" he asks, very low and slow, so we can't make out his accent or tone, but he certainly doesn't sound friendly. We were originally going to camp there 2 nights, but I have a bad feeling now for obvious reasons, and I blurt out, "Oh, we're not hanging around, we're leaving tomorrow morning." My friends murmur in agreement, and the guy says nothing. Just stands there, staring down at us. I notice his clothing in more detail now. As I mentioned, they were all white, and the top was some kind of loose, plain baseball jersey, only made from a thin cottonous material. This is odd because that night was fairly cool enough that I can see the man's breath, and he should be freezing. But whatever. He just keeps staring at us, and I hear the others in this group shuffling in their spot behind the tree line. Finally, the man speaks again. "You're leaving tomorrow morning." It's not a question. We all agree, panicking. Yes, we're leaving tomorrow. Apparently satisfied, the man turns away and walks back to his group. They all just start making their way back up the slope. My friends and I say very little until we can't hear the group anymore. And even then, they're totally out of earshot. We speak in nervous whispers. What the hell was that all about? Some people are weird. We tried to chill out, get some music rolling, crack open some beers, but we're shaken up now, and what's more, we can still feel like we're being watched. We think the group must be parked up on the slope somewhere, scoping us out. So much for a fun night out drinking and bullshitting. We're too wound up and end up crawling into the tent where we spent the night bunkered down like mice hiding from a cat. We get up early and leave immediately. The whole time we're tracking back to the car park, we still feel like we're being trailed. The sensation of being watched never leaves us. Once we're loaded into the car and on the road, we finally relax. Man, that was some freaky shit last night. We go over all of it, kind of excited in a weird way considering all the different theories. Cult, Satanists, but with Satanists dressed in all white. It's almost amusing now that we're out of danger. We stop in town nearest to the park. It's a real bumfuck nowhere kind of place. Just the petrol station, a dingy-looking pub, a closed-down bank, and some other retail decay. We pull into the petrol station for some snacks, and a guy manning the counter looks like a bit of a hard-ass. But we chat a bit, and he's friendly enough. We tell him about running into some weird people last night in the park, and he's interested in that. He makes us explain in detail what happened. After he's heard our story, I expect him to laugh it off. Oh, they were just some religious weirdos that camp out there sometimes. But he doesn't laugh. He gets all quiet and narrows his eyes. You kids were real lucky last night, he says. And that right there is the scariest part, because he's a no bullshit cowboy type, and I can tell he's being deadly serious. We pay for our snacks and drive back to the city, never to return. I've told this story a few times, and others often come up with kooky explanations, that those weird people were ghosts or alien hybrids or aboriginal spirits or something. The white clothes seemed to trip people out. This wasn't that. These were real flesh and blood people we saw. There was nothing paranormal about it. I once came across a similar story in a forum. It happened in the USA. But it was almost exactly the same experience.
Number 4. My ex-girlfriend and I had been broken up for a couple of days, and she was getting the rest of her belongings out of my house. I was at the gym and I texted her to see if she was finished. I received a text from her saying that she had, and then I finished lifting and I headed home. I got to my house and all the lights were off except for my porch light. I opened the door and I was hit with the smell of gas. I first thought that my furnace had ruptured a line. I left all the lights on and I went down into the basement to see if I could hear or smell something, anything near the furnace. But there was no gas smell in the basement. I went back upstairs and I checked the stovetop on the kitchen. Sure enough, one of the burners had been turned on high and not lit. I turned it off and I proceeded to open all the windows downstairs to vent the gas. My first thought was that this couldn't have been done intentionally. If my thermostat had kicked on, or if I turned the lights on, I could have blown myself up. The problem was that the knob couldn't just turn itself. It had to be pressed in and turned in order to light the burner. Then I remembered what she said to me once. I thought it was a joke at the time. If I can't have you, no one will. I am 100% sure that she was the one who turned on the burner to my stove without lighting it. So yeah, this crazy bitch tried to blow me, my house, and my cats up. Number 5. Little background. I worked summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and set up our tent. Me and my co-counselor Mike take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts, and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they all head into their tents. We were positioned in a small walkway from the shoreline, but still in the line of sight where we had our fire pit. So the kids have gone to bed, and me and Mike are shooting the shit by the water, smoking cigarettes. Just hanging out before we head into the tents and call it a night ourselves. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch black water when we saw a small light approaching us slowly, and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak, and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now it is important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with a stranger in an environment where we're responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give this mystery paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization and that we would respect them to find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling the kayak was a woman who looked like she was in her 60s, had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that were trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her eyes looked dead. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized that she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all your children safe in bed?" she asked, pointing to the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond, and quite frankly shitting myself, I responded by telling her that they were fine and she had to leave. "That's good. Just expected for this time," she said, with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point, myself and Mike were legitimately creeped out, and not only by the appearance of this mystery woman who resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of our kids we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, grabbing our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking the kids. Half an hour later is where shit started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another group of kids, the same age group. She sent me a text, which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, quit screwing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know that I had seen someone near my campsite that had seemed really eerie, and I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently one of their kids opened their tent to go use the bathroom and seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards the shoreline. Number 6. When I was a teenager, I was goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup. I even had a pair of combat boots. My friend and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at the local cemetery. We started as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. That all changed one night. My friend called me to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of our other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before, so we were on our own. My friend picked me up, and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out and smoking cigarettes and bullshitting about the recent issues she was having with her boyfriend, when we noticed at the top of the hill we were on, about 100 feet, was a bonfire that had been lit. You have to understand that this cemetery is about a block off campus of a major university, and it is not uncommon to see college students go here to party. My friend and I sighed, knowing that we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew the police would show up because some jerks decided that they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigs and take off. Just then, this most horrible stench came wafting down the hill from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and I covered my mouth, and I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head, saying, "I don't know what they're doing up there, let's just leave." We get to the car, and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, maybe we should go up there and see what they're doing. My stomach turned, and a cold shiver went through my body, and my friend must have had the same feeling because at the same time we both said, "No, we should leave." My friend turned the car on, switched on the headlights to put it in reverse, and looked over her shoulder before backing up. I was still looking up the hill. A figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see the silhouette, but I was sure whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me, and I said, "Go, go, go, go," getting louder and more panicked with each word. My friend looked back up the hill for a second just to see the figure step towards us, and she slammed on the gas and peeled out of there, going reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive and we were out. We didn't say anything for a while until she said, "What the hell were they burning?" I shook my head. "I don't know." She dropped me off at home and I went to bed. The next morning I went out and went to the kitchen. My mom was drinking her morning coffee and I joined her. We talked about her job for a bit, when suddenly this comes up. "Did you hear what happened last night?" I shrugged and said no. I had just gotten up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from the parking garage. I said, "Oh my God, did they find her?" "They did, but it was too late," she replies. "Whoever took her had raped her and murdered her. They found her this morning in the cemetery. He had tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire." I froze. My brain was going a mile a minute. The realization slowly creeped up. That was the smell. Needless to say, I never hung out in the cemetery at night again. I think back at our decision to leave instead of investigating the bonfire. That one decision could have changed everything. Dark silhouette in the bonfire. Let's not meet. Number 7. In the earliest months of 2014, I started dating my current boyfriend. We hit it off immediately, which resulted in me staying at his house multiple nights out of the week. Eventually, I ended up living there, sharing a mobile home with him and his father. The neighborhood itself was fairly creepy, one of those unnamed country areas that branched from a main road. Richard, my boyfriend's dad, would tell me stories about how the entire street was owned by one man, a guy who had gotten old in recent years and let the land go. As a result, the field beside our mobile home was overgrown with weeds and old trees. He also told me about these strange occurrences, which he attributed to two things: aliens and kids from another neighborhood. Despite his warnings on how creepy the area was, I didn't take him too seriously. After all, his biggest concern was aliens. I was unemployed for a short period of time after moving in, which left me alone in the house, while my boyfriend and his dad went to work. I spent most of my days putting in job applications, cleaning up the house, and reading online. I guess you could say that my presence in the house was pretty predictable, which is the only explanation for this occurrence. On a day as unremarkable as any other, while I sat reading a book in my bedroom, I hear a car pull into our driveway. The sound was pretty distinctive considering the area wasn't paved but rather made up of gravel. Thinking that my boyfriend, Cody, came home early from work, I slipped my shoes on and started for the front door, which was on the other side of the house. Before I could reach it, a knock sounded against the glass. The front of our trailer had a sunroom, basically a front porch that is encased in windows, making it so you had to go through 2 doors before stepping into the living room. Being as paranoid as he was, Richard would usually lock the sunroom door before leaving for work, unless he was in a huge hurry. Still thinking that maybe my boyfriend had come home early from work, I opened the front door to let him in. Only, it wasn't Cody at the front door, but rather a short Hispanic man. He smiled at me through the glass and nodded, almost as if I was exactly who he was expecting to answer. I noticed that he had one hand behind his back and another hanging at his side. I tried not to think too much about it. Besides him and our carport was a small white truck, and I could hear the engine was still running. Hey, can I help you?" I tried to make my voice as strong as I could, but it only came out shaky. "I'm with the garbage company. I'm here to pick up your trash cans," he claimed. I knew immediately that this was a lie. Yes, it is common for the garbage company to come and pick up your trash cans if the bill hadn't been paid, but I had gone with Cody the week before to pay it. Not to mention the drivers would never knock on the door. They would only grab the cans and leave. I glanced to my left, seeing that our trash cans were still there, on the outside of the sunroom, somewhat behind the house. "They're right there. If you need them, then take them," I said. This time my voice was more assertive, causing my visitor's smile to turn into a frown. "May I come in?" he asked. I didn't verbally answer, I just shook my head. My heart dropped as I watched him reach and grab the handle to the glass door, pulling on it to open it. The door clicked, obviously locked. The man tried to pull it again, this time harder, causing the metal to creak. I jumped back into my house and slammed the door, locking it with purpose. It was quiet in the house, that I only noticed two sounds, my heart pounding, and the doorknob to the back door jiggling. There was no way it could be the guy from the front porch. He couldn't have had time to get to the back door, even if he ran. I yelled through the door, "I'm calling the fucking police!" Still baffled at the fact that this was all happening in broad daylight. I could hear the truck drive through the carport and into our backyard. Immediately after that, I took the moment to look through the blinds of a window, watching a separate man jump off the back porch and into the passenger seat. To this day, I'm convinced that these men knew I was home alone and carefully planned an attack. One of them was meant to distract me, while the other broke into the back door. I still don't know what was hidden behind the guy at the front door. All I can say is that I am forever thankful of how paranoid my father-in-law is. Who knows what could have happened if he hadn't locked the sunroom door. Number 8.
I went to high school with a guy, we'll say his name is Bob. Bob and I were never really close, but we sometimes hung out in the same circle. He was in a band and I was in drama. Bob was a little off. I think he may have had a learning disability, and maybe that resulted in him being socially awkward. Anyway, my sophomore year, he was dating a friend of mine, so I saw him more. By junior year, he had dropped out and was trying to get his GED. That was the last I heard of Bob for a while. At least, fast forwarding to the summer, 2 years after graduating. Bob calls me up out of the blue and asks if I'd go camping with him and a friend that I don't know. He says that he has a spot and is totally secluded and that we'd be hiking 5 miles a day. He tries to sell me on this. He insists that it'll be awesome and fun and we'll bond. As I listen to him, something from the pit of my stomach says, "No, don't do this." Never being especially close to him and not having seen him for about 2 years, I thought that it was weird that Bob would call me up. I declined his offer. The following November, Bob was on the news because he's killed his partner. He worked for an armored van service and stole the money in the van. There were news updates about him fleeing out of state. He was finally caught on a routine traffic stop, I believe. Anyway, when his case went to trial, his journal was entered into evidence. The prosecutor said that Bob wrote that he and his friend, the same one that they were going on the camping trip, hatched a plan to become professional assassins. I believe that the camping trip he invited me to was all a ruse so that he could get me into a secluded place so that he and his friend could practice how to murder someone, namely me.
Number 9. It was the middle of the summer and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our home in Cape Cod. It was about a 2-hour drive, so it's no big deal for them to leave me home alone for a few days. My mom had made pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever I wanted, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza or something. Things were all good. First night I was alone. I stayed up until 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw that it was a little past 1 p.m. I'd made plans to go play some street hockey with a few friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes when I heard my back door open. I immediately froze. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained and trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was maybe the wind or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. The bathroom is directly upstairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. So the stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so I can't see into the kitchen. I walk down, even though my house is old as shit and each step on the stairs make a super loud creak. I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took a little over a minute walking down all the 12 stairs. When I got to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner into the kitchen, I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anyone in the kitchen. There's no way. I wouldn't have already heard another noise. And there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself and just normally walked down the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of the kitchen is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face. He's just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't at his side. They were held in the strangest, most abnormal position I have ever seen. They were where one would normally put their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up a little bit behind him. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it's the most demonic, abnormal position I have ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right then and there. Looking back, I can realize how fucking creepy this situation was, but in the moment, I just took one step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, and beelined it up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen. With my heart beating out of control, I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911. Nearly in tears, told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor in my room in practically the fetal position, I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear. Watching the shadow across the bottom of my door shift in tiny ways, I stayed balled up staring at the gap, praying for the man to just go away, all while the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone up to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps slowly creak the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. Fear does funny things to the body. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened the door to one of them standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays my parents never leave me home alone, thank God, and I check every lock in the house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone stand still, but I'm doing alright. Even working with sketch artists and lineups, the police never found who the fuck was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street, smiling under a lamppost. Number 10. I was working a 12-hour overnight shift at a nursing home. I was in the general unit that night, and one of the residents was close to death. When I arrived at 6 p.m., I got a report from the daily nurse, who told me that Mary was circling the drain. She also told me that Mary suddenly had family showing up now that she was dying. Unfortunately, this is very common. Some residents live with us for years and we never see any show up for them until they were dying. Our residents were all private paying folk who could pay about $8,000 to $10,000 a month for a high-end nursing home. The rooms themselves are like Hilton suites. When someone was close to death, family members would crawl out of the woodwork to prove how much they loved Grandma and apparently all of her jewelry. Apparently, Mary lived with us for 4 years, and I honestly didn't know she even had family. I went to meet the family. There was a son and a grandson sitting in the room, and a little granddaughter sitting on the floor outside of the room in the hallway. The adults sat in Mary's room, sleeping or playing on laptops, and let the little girl run all over the unit without any supervision. It was a long night. The little girl wasn't afraid of the elderly residents at all. I first caught her standing in another resident's room stroking the face of an elderly woman. I thought it was sweet that she was visiting the other residents, but stepped into the room and asked her to leave. I told her to please go back to her great-grandmother's room and not to go into the other resident's room. She smiled and prettily said, "I like the way her skin feels." Okay, so the kid's a little creepy. She goes back to Mary's room and I go about my duties. I don't see the kid for a while. It's super late, so I'm assuming they took her home. About 1 a.m., I come out of the medication room and I see the kid standing in the hallway, all by herself. She's staring into another resident's room, but not going in. I walk down the hallway to send her back to her great-grandmother's room once again. This time I'm really annoyed that her family is letting her run around all by herself at 1 in the morning at her age. As I walk up to her before I can say anything, she smiles at me and asks, "Do you like to touch them?" Completely forgetting what I was going to say, I just stare at her and say, "What?" She looks into the resident room that she was standing outside of and says, "The old people. Do you like to touch them? When they're dead, I mean." I don't even know what to say to this. It's dark and this kid is creepy. She is way too articulate for how young she looks. When I don't reply, she asks, "Does their skin feel any different when they're dead?" Not knowing what to say to this smiling kid who just asked me if I like touching dead bodies, I tell her to go back to her great-grandmother's room. She glares at me, looks angrier than any kid could ever look, but she walks back to her great-grandmother's room. Mary died at about 4 a.m. that night. I didn't see the kid again, but I was afraid I would see her in there rubbing Mary's skin. The son and grandson left before the funeral home arrived to take her body, but I don't see the little girl. I assume they took her home after we had our enlightening chat about how dead bodies feel. It gives me the creeps. I never saw her leave. I kept looking over my shoulder the rest of the night for that damn kid. The next morning I told the same day shift nurse about how creepy the little girl was. She told me I'm glad she wasn't on my shift. I just had the son and the grandson. She swore that the little girl was not there on her shift. I guess she must have arrived after my shift had started then. It was as I drove home that I realized that I had not seen anyone else interact with the kid all night except for me. I never saw anyone else talk to her, and I never actually walked her into Mary's room. Also, the family had never even mentioned the kid at any time when they were here. And nobody saw her leave with the son or the grandson. Number 11. This happened about 10 years ago. I went to a bar with some buddies of mine for dinner and a couple of drinks. I live on a dead-end street, so traffic's pretty light. I'm driving home and I notice this car is following me. I didn't think too much about it at the time. I pulled onto my street and this car continues to follow. This car pulls up beside me and the driver motions for me to roll down the window because he has something he wants to say. I lean over and roll down the window and the guy says, "Hey, I didn't see someone in the back seat." He leans forward towards the driver and says, No, that's not the guy." The guy in the front seat then says, "Oh, forget it, man. Just go to sleep." I give him a confused look and he just repeats, "Go to sleep." He then drives off. Afterwards, it dawns on me that he probably had a gun on his lap and thought I was the guy that wronged his buddy in the back seat. I was leaned over right towards him, so he would have shot me in the head if he thought I was guilty. Number 12. This happened to me when I was a kid. I'm a girl and I was 5 years old when this happened. I grew up with my mom and my stepfather in an apartment in Chicago at the time. My stepfather was a crackhead. I'm pretty certain he used every day. He was a pretty good father considering he was high all the time.
I felt way closer to him than my mom. We spent a ton of time together after his morning walks. His habit was really bad. My mother was the only one who worked because he kept getting fired. At the time, my mother had just gotten new furniture, a whole living room set, 2 couches, lamps, end tables, rugs. She even got a brand new TV. She was pretty proud and happy, mainly because she was able to hide enough money away from my stepfather to buy everything. A few days after she bought everything, my mom and I went to Burger King. We came back to the apartment. My mother opened the door, and her smile dropped. There was absolutely nothing in the living room. She told me to check my things. My bike, all my video games, my TV, and my clarinet were all gone as well. There were quite other things that were gone from the apartment. You already know who the culprit is. My stepfather. Apparently he owed some people money for drugs. He said he had no choice. He had to either pay up now or it'll be everything that he loves. As you see, his habit was very, very bad. Now to the meat of the story. One day I woke up to my stepfather calling me. It was pretty early. The sun had just started to peek into my room. I got up and I heard him in the kitchen talking to someone frantically. I couldn't hear much because the door was closed, but I remember making out a little bit. He said, "Man, she's beautiful. You won't be disappointed." I slipped on my house shoes trying to figure out who he was talking to. I heard one response, but the voice was very deep, so I couldn't understand what was said. It was strange for someone to be visiting our apartment, and especially strange since it was so early. I was tired, confused, and a bit annoyed at being woken up. I opened my door. From it, I have a straight line to the kitchen. I see my stepfather nervously fidgeting, pacing, and talking. He saw me and said, "Ah, here she is, man." I stood in my doorway and tried to give him the look of, "Who the hell are you talking to?" He motioned for me to come in. I walk into the kitchen and I see a tall, older white man wearing shades looking back. I assume he was in his late 40s, he was balding, had a very short beard, and he was dressed very nicely. My father says, "Here she is. What do you think?" My parents tended to show me off to people, so this wasn't odd to me. The man looked at me, I assume through his shades, and then looked back at my stepfather. My stepfather had the most nervous smile on his face I had ever seen. My stepfather told me to give a twirl. I wasn't going to twirl in front of this strange guy, and definitely not this early. So he forcefully turned me. He held my nightgown taut, so it was fitting against my body, and said, "Not bad, right?" I pushed his hands off me. This was very, very strange now. I didn't understand what was going on, and I knew something was wrong. The entire time the white man said nothing. He just stared at me. My stepfather then told me, "You're going to have to go with him now." I frowned and asked, "Why?" But before I could really start, the white man spoke. He squatted down to my height, smiled, and asked, "How old are you?" Nervously, I said, "I'm 8. "Ah, you're a big girl then. Do you like school?" I replied, "I love school." His conversation and his smile made me feel a little bit more at ease. I looked over the man's shoulder and see my stepfather's now frowning and glaring at me. This scared me. I've never seen him with this look on his face except for suspicious people to warn them not to mess with him. I keep looking back at my stepfather, trying to answer the man's questions, and knowing that I said something wrong by my father's expression. The white guy glances back at my stepfather while still squatting down at my height. My stepfather looks away in fear. The man stood up, looks back down at me, and says, "It was nice talking to you. You're a very smart young lady. Now go back to bed." I wasn't used to anyone giving me orders except from school or my parents, but I knew not to question the guy, and I walked off back to my room. I looked back and he was watching me. I stood inside my room at the door and looked back again. He said, "Close your door and go back to bed." I looked at him and he smiled back at me and motioned for me to go on. I closed the door and sat on my bed. I hear the man say something to my father in an angry voice. I hear my stepfather begging very loudly, "Please, please take her." The kitchen has a door leading outside to the staircase. My window was pretty close to it. I hear the kitchen door open, so I slid my window open a crack. I hear my stepfather repeatedly begging, "Please, please." The man yells at him, "She's a fucking kid." I tried to peek out to see the staircase. There were two other large men standing there near the door. I then presumed the white man punched my stepfather. I couldn't fully see the whole scene, but I heard a thump inside and outside, and I suppose that was from him falling. The white guy and the other two men walked down the stairs to a nice black car parked in the alley. I hear the kitchen door close, and soon after, my bedroom door opens. My stepfather is drenched in sweat. He smiles at me sheepishly and casually says to not tell my mom. I just stared at him. He then asked, "Do you want to go to the park?" I said no. He walked away and left the apartment. I sat there trying to put the pieces together. It clicked that my own stepfather was trying to sell me, more than likely to pay off a huge drug debt. Then everything falls into place. The strange, oddly friendly white man considered taking me. Why would he take me? What would he have done with me? Where would I go? What about my mom? Feelings of fear, anger, and sadness flooded over me. I laid there and cried for hours, thinking about how close I was to never seeing my mom again, and that my stepdad had planned to do this to me. My mother leaves him some years later. I still haven't told her about this, afraid she might lose it. I'm 26 years old now, and it's still hard to think about this without crying.
Number 13. So this occurred many years ago, but will ever stay with me and change my views of allowing my kids to have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas, and my parents had gotten me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then before cell phones were big. And I had given my friends my number because who wouldn't? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m. and I had been sleeping when my phone began to ring. I thought, that's odd. Who could be calling me this early? We all have school in the morning. So I answer it, but all could be heard was breathing on the other end. I left it off as someone messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. This time I answered and said, "Who is this?" Nothing, just breathing again. At this moment I was beginning to get irritated. I told him to stop calling me and hung up. I laid down again for another 30 minutes when my phone rang yet again for a third time that morning. I was mad, so I answered it and said, "This isn't funny, I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, stop calling me." This time there was a reply. It was a man's voice, sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said, "I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?" With that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what happened. With that, she woke up my dad, and he made me tell him what had happened. So they both get up, and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything, makes sure the locks on the doors are all locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke, and that everything will be fine, and tells me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep, until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready. I open my blinds to my window that leads to my backyard, and notice on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents in. They were totally freaked out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police came out to take a report and look at the evidence, and they decided they wanted to go to the backyard. Sure enough, there was a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house, to the back of my window, to the back door, and to the front door. The police thinks the guy was trying to get into the house. Number 14. I recently moved out and I already have a horror story to tell. The house I moved into isn't anything impressive. It's just a house that's appropriate for 1 or 2 people. But I say right away I started hearing weird sounds coming from inside the walls. I first heard it in the kitchen and then in the bathroom. But on night 3 I started hearing it in my bedroom. I was sure there was some kind of animal living inside my walls. I just had to figure out how to get rid of it. The next morning, I didn't have enough milk to even fill a bowl of cereal. I couldn't believe I hadn't realized I need more milk. In fact, I seemed to be eating up all my food pretty fast. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of breathing. Not my breathing. It sounded like just the breathing of a person. I flipped the lamp on and it stopped. I chalked it up as my mind playing tricks on me right before waking up. I peered through the vent with a flashlight. There wasn't even a duct behind the vent. Unfortunately, I didn't look into the air conditioning system while buying the house, so I didn't know this. That night I had to sleep in the heat with no AC, so I was up pretty late, constantly rolling around and flipping my pillow over. Then I eventually started hearing the breathing again, but this time I was fully awake. I knew it was real this time. It was coming from my left. I looked to my left at the air vent. The sound was surely coming from there. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it through the vent. I dropped it and screamed. There was someone's face peering through the cracks of the vent. The first thing I saw were eyes, open wide and glowing. I screamed all the way out of the house. I found out that there was this crazy, dangerous homeless man living in my walls, and he had been eating my food ever since I moved in. Number 15. So I was at a friend's house one night, and it's this massive house, sort of a castle really. The inside is very old-timey and the outside reflects that. Anyway, me and my 3 other friends are in this one room called the Mushroom because of the color of the walls. It's about 2 in the morning and we just finished watching a movie. My friend Joe says that he's super hungry. My other friend Jack said that there's no food downstairs that is going to be easy to make. So we decided to go into town about 10 minutes away on our bikes. My other friend Pete is sleeping and he tells us to go without him. We leave the house and it's pitch black. We cycle a route until we get onto this road that leads us back to the castle. Joe tells us to pull over because he's got to piss. I look up at Jack's face and it's as pale as a ghost. I ask him what's wrong, but he doesn't answer. He's just fixated on something on the other side of the street. Fear washes over me when I see this old man in a window of an elderly home on the other side of the street. This man is just looking at us with a look that I can only describe as pure evil. His eyes are sunk into his head, and he has this satanic smile slowly spreading from ear to ear. We cycle on. I turn around to see this man is still staring. He lifts his hand and waves us goodbye. We cycle as fast as our legs can push, and get into a lane that leads us back to the castle. I look up to see something that will stay with me to the grave. I slam on my brakes. I turn to them, and all I can muster is a stammer. It's him in the window. He's in the room with Pete. They look up and confirm my fears. That same man is in the room where we were sleeping, looking at us with the same smile and the same dead eyes. He waved at us in the same way he did when we left. He then turned and walked away from the window. We saw the shadow of his torso on the curtains. The light in the room then went off. We rushed inside. Jack picked up an old 12 gauge left over the mantelpiece and loaded it with 2 shells. We walked upstairs and burst into the room. There was no one there. The room was just as we left it, and Pete was still breathing. I don't know if what we saw was real. We never told any of our parents, and we never told Pete. It's an experience that will haunt me forever. Number 16. This is only brief, but it scared me for a long time. I used to live in a very isolated rural town with a population of approximately 120 people, and as expected, I knew everyone there. My best friend and I were your typical benign teenage delinquents, and our favorite game at the time was an activity that we referred to as Dead Fred. We would stuff a full-length wetsuit with newspaper, dress it in long sleeves and jeans, and leave it lying in the middle of the street at nighttime. Meanwhile, we hid in the bushes and laughed and mused over the various reactions for those who came across the scene. One night, a car, seemingly didn't even notice dead Fred and drove right over him at high speed. The driver screeched to a stop about 50 meters away and got out of the car. I recognized him. It was a close friend's dad, a recent retired accountant who I knew very well and had been my rugby coach for the last few seasons. He looked unstable, possibly shaken, but most likely drunk. Drunk driving was quite common in such a small country town. Without much hesitation, he pulled a rifle from a boot of his car, fired several shots at the corpse from afar, and drove away. My friend and I kept this to ourselves, and as far as I know, we're the only ones who know. The driver remained a close family friend, continued to coach me in rugby, and has since had grandchildren. I still see him when I go home for holidays. As far as I know, he never fessed up to the incident and carried on for the next 23 years as if nothing ever happened. Yes, it was a dangerous game and I was a dumb teenager. However, Fred was in plain sight. This guy wasn't paying attention to where he was going, and he chose to fucking shoot this thing without even checking on it. I'm not defending myself or denigrating him. I'm just telling you what happened. A man I know basically appears to have no problem with killing someone and pretending nothing ever happened. Number 17. I was about 25 and out drinking with a friend. We ended up talking with some women at a pub for most of the night, and we ended up going back to their place. Just my luck, the woman I liked passed out on the couch, so I decided to walk home at 2:30 in the morning like an idiot. I had to walk through one of the worst neighborhoods to get home, and about halfway, I passed a 24-hour adult novelty store and I decided to check it out. I noticed that they had an area with a private booth showing videos. I stepped into the dark booth and deposited some quarters. The screen comes on, and to the side of the button I see movement. I look closer and it's a small hole, and I can see an eye looking at me. Immediately I got out of the booth and walked out, too embarrassed to tell the person manning the counter. About 5 minutes into walking home, I got that feeling, and I turned my head quick, and I see a man freeze. He's across the street about 100 feet behind me. It was a guy in his mid-50s with shorter length gray hair and a long pale face with penetrating eyes. We stared at each other for a second until I noticed he had something in his hand. His shoes. My first thought was this guy's trying to sneak up on me, and I yelled "fuck you" in the deepest voice I could muster, and he turned around and walked away. I ran for a while until I was home. I went to bed. Something wakes me up at 4 in the morning. A few seconds go by and I hear it again. It's a cigarette lighter right outside my first floor window. I laid there for a second wondering if this guy really followed me home. I stayed awake until the sun came up. Once it was light outside, I grabbed a bat and went outside to have a look. The guy was gone, but he left a note in the dirt under my window. Just 2 words: "Slice you." I spent the last month of my lease paranoid, but luckily I never saw him again. Number 18. I worked at a campground on night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I would bring in my PS2 and game a good portion of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people. On busy nights, it was usually just me in this little 8-foot by 8-foot shack with nothing around me but dark all night. My first week there, the other third shift guy who was quitting told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said it would ring every night at 4:17 a.m. just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he guessed. He never actually answered it himself. I go for a month with this job. It was the middle of the summer, so most nights I had the window closed so I couldn't hear the payphone go off. Mid-August, I started leaving the windows open during the night. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m. every morning, the phone would ring once. The ring even sounded creepy, like the payphone had been submerged in water and then put where it sat. One night I got up the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm for 4:15 a.m. then went to wait at the phone till it rang. When it did, I answered, but there was no sound, just dead air, like someone was on the other end, but wasn't answering. I said hello a few times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same results. I didn't think anything of it and just left it alone after that for about a month. The week of October, I decided to answer the phone once again. I set my alarm, and when the time came I answered the phone. I repeatedly said hello into the phone. Then I heard what sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth. The voice that sounded was really rough and sounded like he had gargled gravel. He said my name, my complete name, first, middle, and last. It was a voice I've never heard. My voice cut in my throat and I hung up. I rattled some change into the payphone and hit star 69. The number had come from California. I lived in Indiana.